afternoon, everybody. Before I start, I'm going to talk about theory of psychological attributes and their measurability based on relational responding. You should know that I am a psychologist by training, and I consider myself to be actually a behavioral psychologist with an interest in measurement theory. But I've recently been told that my work appears to be highly relevant for the area of consciousness science. I do not know yet whether this is true, but you will not find any explicit claims about conscious experience or phenomenal character in this presentation. However, I think that I will provide a lot of space, in my framework for you to speculate on these things. So I leave the consciousness part to you and to the discussion, and I present my approach from a behavioral psychologist perspective, hoping that this will result in interesting conversation and maybe proceed the field a little bit. So let's start. I have three bullet points prepared for you. First, I want to elaborate on the relation between theory and measurement. Second, I will present a theoretical approach to measurement with a focus on psychology. And finally, I will outline or sketch some empirical implications or empirical questions, and also a paradigm how to investigate those. So what is the relation between theory and measurement? There is an intricate relation. I will start with the representational account of measurement, which basically states that measurement is a homomorphism. So it's a representation, and it's a homomorphism from an empirical relational structure to a numerical relational structure. So we have two kinds of structures here. One is empirical, one is numerical. Numerical means it's a mathematical structure that uses some kind of number system as the domain. And an empirical relational structure can actually be anything we observe. So for example, here on the left, you see a simplistic example of such a representation of measurement in this sense. And you see these symbols, like a less equal sign that's a bit curvy, and this plus sign in a circle. I use these symbols to designate empirical relations as opposed to mathematical relations. We have the less equal sign and the plus sign on the right-hand side also, and those refer to the numerical domain, the mathematical representation. So what's this all about? You have three objects here. The ERS, the empirical system, on the left-hand side. It consists of only three objects. I tried to keep it as simple as possible. Yeah? Three objects only, U, V, and W, and you may imagine them to be like stones or uncalibrated weights that you compare by means of a beam balance. So this is a very nice example. So we imagine having a beam balance, and we have three, let's say, stones. Why not? And we can put them in the pans, and we can observe the system, and we see the pan either tilts to one side or the other, or it doesn't. And we can express this observation, we can keep track of our experiments by using this formalized language here with the less equal, empirical less equal sign and the plus sign, designating concatenation of these objects. In this case, it means like putting two stones in the pan at the same time. Okay, so this is a pretty clear example, and you see we can now perform paired comparisons, like we compare stone or object U to object V, and we see that the beam balance tilts to one side. We can now exchange the stones in any possible permutation, and we can perform addition or concatenation, which is indicated in the lower three lines. And this is pretty much everything you can do with this system. So if you have a beam balance and you have three stones, this is a complete description of this empirical relation structure. Okay? Now, this is the left-hand side. What is measurement now? Measurement consists in a mapping of this empirical relational structure to a numerical structure, a numerical relational structure. In this case, it's the natural numbers 1, 2, and 3. Like, this is the whole system we use. We don't need anything else. We could use a more complex or more rich numerical system like the real numbers, but we don't need them. Yeah? For this very simple system, it's enough to use the numbers 1, 2, 3 in combination with the less equal relation and the mathematical operation of addition. You see that the structure on the left-hand side and the structure on the right-hand side is expressed by means of these symbols. It's exactly the same. Yeah? So I literally just copy-pasted what was on the left-hand side, and I replaced the relational signs. So this is actually what's meant by measurement. So measurement is the assignment, it's not the assignment of numbers or numerals to objects or something like that. Measurement consists in this mapping of one structure onto another structure. And if there's no such mapping, I don't speak of measurement. Well, so the essence of representational measurement is that we have empirical relations, and these empirical relations need to have the same structure as the mathematical relations we use to represent them, otherwise the representation is flawed. Well, that's pretty much it. In this sense, representational measurement provides structural conditions for measurability. So we can use this framework to check whether a certain structure is actually quantitative or not. By quantitative, I mean there's order, there's some kind of additivity, and there's continuity. Well, this is a very simple system where there is some kind of additivity. Of course, if you use more stones, if you use different objects, and so on and so forth, the beam balance will yield a richer structure, which can actually be properly represented by the positive real numbers. Okay, that's well-known fact. We call these measurement devices scales, and then we speak of weight measurement. But why do we speak of weight measurement? If measurement is only this, if measurement is purely defined in structural terms, we know that we're measuring something, but we don't know what we're measuring. So what is the theoretical meaning of this numerical representation? We only know that there's some quantitative structure here. But why is it there? What does it mean? And that's where the account of theory-based measurement comes in, that a colleague of mine recently published. And this account states that the representational theory of measurement is necessary but not sufficient to provide a complete account of measurement, because it only gives structural syntactic conditions, but it leaves out the whole level of meaning. We don't know what we're measuring. But if we have a theory, an overarching theory that we can apply to the system at hand, in this case the beam balance, and this theory explains why we observe the structure we observe. So maybe a theory of the dynamics of movement or something. If we only had such a thing, good thing is we have such a thing, we can actually interpret these numbers in terms of the theoretical terms, of the theoretical characters that we use. So in our example, this looks bad, but it looks maybe a bit complicated, but it's not actually. On the very top, we have a theory. In this case, let's use classical mechanics because it suffices to describe the behavior of a beam balance. And the funny thing is, like, we have these equations here, like F equals M times A, and M is interpreted as mass. How do we know that our numbers correspond to this M? How can we know that? Wishful thinking? No. We know it because we can apply the theory to the beam balance. We can use the theory to describe the behavior of the beam balance, and we arrive at a model of a beam balance, a physical model of the beam balance. That's the second bubble here. And this beam balance model actually predicts that the beam balance will tilt to one side if and only if the mass of the objects on the respective side is higher than the mass of the object on the other side. It appears trivial, but it's not. Yeah? It's not trivial at all. So we need to understand how the beam balance works in order to know what we're measuring, because the idea is that this representation here now allows for a mapping from these numbers to the theoretical values of m. Because there's a one-to-one correspondence that we derive from the theory, we can actually give meaning to our measurements. And that's what we mean by theory-based measurement. So numerical representations may be interpreted as measurements of theoretical quantities if and only if the empirical relational structure can be adequately described by an underlying formal theory. By the way, it needs to be formal, otherwise we don't get the amount of precision we need for a numerical embedding. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Now, that's physics. It's always easy to talk about physics. Psychologists or theoretical psychologists like it because, yeah, well, it's easy. It seems easy. How about psychology? And there comes our approach. The first question is, what is the relational structure we want to describe? So if we want to measure anything in psychology, any psychological attribute, we need to specify the kind of structures we're dealing with. So we require a theory that explains the empirical relational structure under study. And in psychology, I argue that the empirical relational structures we're dealing with all boil down to relational responding. That is, behavior that consists in choice or preferences, avoidance behavior. There's a saying in behavioral psychology that says all behavior is choice. And I think that's basically true, because whenever you do something, you don't do many other things. So we have basically we have behavioral responses here, relational responses. So in order to understand what we're measuring, logically, it follows that we need a theory that explains relational responding. And now, the good thing is we know a lot about relational responding. We know from previous work that it's a kind of operant behavior. It can be trained, it can be shaped, can be selected by consequences. So we need a theory of operant behavior to understand what we're measuring in psychology. That's the conclusion here. Well, and luckily, there are such theories. There is a formal approach of behavioral psychology that is currently under strong development. It's called behavioral selection theory. And the good thing about this approach is it applies to different levels of analysis. So the idea behind behavioral selection theory is that the structure of behavior is shaped through selection by consequences on different levels. This is an old idea, actually, but it has only recently been formalized. So we have the species level, which we currently, usually denote as evolution or natural selection. We have the population level. Some people speak of cultural selection. I think this is very true indeed, because we have selection processes at work on the population level that are not mediated by genes or anything biological per se. And we also have selection on an individual level, so shaping of behavior based on personal experiences. Well, I keep the formal details apart out of this talk and skip just right to the central idea of our approach. So let's apply this framework to what I've said about relational responding. Imagine the consequences of behavior do not depend on the stimuli per se, not on the objects, but on the relations. That is, we have selection by consequences on the relation of, on specific relational responding. And our claim is that whenever such relational responding is being selected, the organism needs to produce an internal discriminative stimulus because otherwise they would not know what to do. Like, the argument is pretty clear. The relation in relational responding does not lie in the objects. The object, it's not a property of the stimuli. The relation is a property of the behavior. And because it's a property of the behavior, we need to produce something. And you might speculate, but I'll leave that to you, that this actually could tell us a lot about conscious experience or phenomenal character of whatever is going on inside our minds. Oh, whatever. Yeah, excuse my lack of vocabulary here. As I said, I provide the psychology part, you may provide the consciousness part. Okay, so the idea is, I think, pretty clear. Psychological attributes in this view are internal discriminative stimuli that emerge from the selection of relational response structures. That's our main theoretical claim. And this comes with some very important implications because we have ultimately we've been able to link selection on all three levels to expected increases in evolutionary fitness. That's a formal thing, actually, that I skipped earlier. And therefore, we always would expect a quantitative character of psychological attributes to the degree that they reflect anticipated changes in evolutionary fitness or evolutionary fitness predictors. This is highly context dependent, of course. But we would also expect a qualitative character in the way that we have different contexts in which these selection structures occur, and we also have different behavioral domains of choice. Like, you can run away or stay, you can eat or leave or whatever. So depending on the behavioral domain and depending on the context, we would expect that we have qualitatively different quantities that we might actually be able to measure in psychology. This is all very theoretical, and there's little evidence that there actually are psychological quantities of that kind, but there are some, at least. Not all of them, but some appear to be measurable. So let me just really briefly outline some empirical implications. So how could we test such a theoretical claim? It's a bold claim, actually. So I should provide at least an outline. And I think that we might exploit a well-known experimental paradigm from psychology, which is called the match-to-sample task and its derivatives. And we may apply this to relations, to relational responding. What is the match-to-sample task? We start with a predefined relational structure on a stimulus set that is more or less neutral. This is like the general way to do it, like, for example, abstract shapes or something. And we can now actually define the structure we would like to establish by the consequences in our experiment. So we train, one might say, or we reinforce behavior that is in accordance with the structure we would like to have. Why would we do that? We would do that because that way we gain control over the relational structures that we want to investigate. That's a very good thing. That's a strategy that is being used by physicists and very, very little by psychologists so far. It's a model structure. So how do we do that? We just provide feedback depending on the behavior of the respondent. For example, if we have these two shapes here, the upper two shapes are presented and the individual is asked to choose one of the shapes that are below the line, we might predefine that you should choose the same shape. And we may just provide feedback that's correct, that's not correct. And people will learn to choose the same shape. And this concept of sameness or differentness or whatever may actually be defined in a very abstract way. We can establish equivalence classes between physical stimuli that are very, very different. That's something that has been done in the laboratory before. Humans are experts in this. And interestingly, nearly no other Like hardly any other organism is able to learn relational structures to the amount of complexity that we can. So this might actually provide another line of reasoning for conscious thought or anything. Okay, I think I should be done by now. We have like some empirical questions, but I just present them briefly and then we skip to the discussion. Imagine that we establish some kind of structures. We can actually, apart from equivalence, we can train people to respond in accordance with additivity or continuity or rank order. So if we do that, we could actually perform experiments where we ask people what they experience when a new quantitative structure has been established. If we're right, and if this corresponds to any experience or subjective experience, people should actually start giving verbal reports about new, qualitatively new quantities. This might be exciting, actually. So we establish a behavioral structure that is quantitative on a domain that has no psychological meaning so far, but it gains psychological meaning through the experiment. So we can do the same with different behavioral domains and test the hypothesis that we have qualitatively different quantities or attributes. What else can we do? That's the psychometrician's point of view here. We could actually look into this common practice in psychology where we give people a questionnaire with a rating scale, and they are asked to choose some kind of number, like on a scale from 1 to 10, how painful is this? And then you hit them very hard. So that's, of course, we don't know whether the structure of pain is quantitative. We don't even know whether the structure of responding is quantitative. Like, this is just numerals. It's not even numbers. So we would hypothesize that if we establish a quantitative structure, that might be mapped to another quantitative structure. And I think I should really, really stop now and start the discussion. Otherwise, the others won't be able to talk. So let's go.
Yeah, thank you very much.